this course is for a relatively smaller class size, face-to-face, so we can have everyone introduce their own project one by one. I guess that will be a little bit more difficult for us for our session, given that we are not face-to-face and we have about 50 people. And even if so, if one of you needs at least 1 minute, it's going to be over an hour. So my plan is that I think it will be better that you at least send me something beforehand about the title of the project, whether or not you would like to say something. Tomorrow, not tomorrow, next class. My plan is to allocate an hour for project feedback and discussion. So it'll be better if you let me know beforehand what your project is and whether or not you're willing to speak in that occasion. In that sense, I can just arrange this project according to topics. I guess most of you are going to do policy evaluation, but some of you might choose to do research proposal as well. So my plan is to group you into at least first research proposal and policy evaluation, and I can group basic policies that look similar together for you guys to discuss a little bit. We can use some of these breakout rooms as well. So the necessary part for such a discussion is that you should first you should have an idea what exact policy you're looking into, or you have some tentative plans. You have several policies you're interested in looking at, and you're not sure what are the best aspects to cover, or you have a few options and you would like to get some feedback from me and from the class. That's fine as well. Just give me something beforehand that I can collect your thoughts and try to plan the discussion session ahead of the time. All right. So let's continue our discussion about environmental evaluation. So we talked about a few reviewed preferences, methods, travel cost method, hedonic pricing, what else? And the defensive spending. So these three are pretty standard reviewed preferences approach of pricing environmental good and environmental bads. Basically, for travel costs, it's more about evaluating environmental goods. So the benefits of good environmental scenarios or assets. So how much you're willing to pay to visit one of these assets. Hedonic pricing could cover both goods and bads. The defensive spending is about avoiding environmental bads, avoiding pollution, avoiding dangerous areas. So you could consider an environmental bad as you could apply to kind of climate change setting about people avoiding flooding risk. There could be two ways of avoiding flood risks. You can build seawalls, or you can move to safer areas. So the first avoidance could be captured by the price of the seawalls, like how much you spend on seawalls and so on. And second aspect should be reflected in housing prices of houses very close to the coast and exposed to higher sea level rise risk, as well as houses that stay a little bit away from very dangerous flooding zones. And you can expect the variation of these housing prices to respond to additional flooding risk. Like if sea level rises by 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, how would the price gradients in distance to the coast to change? You should have some basic idea about all these settings. If I'm trying to kind of present this setting present the climate change setting, and ask you to apply the thinking, the discussions in the classes where we take pollution as an example to think about this problem. So basically, for all these reviewed preferences methods, what you have is usually a lower bound, because basically you must feel happier, or you must feel better after paying the cost of the happiness that this site is going to bring to you for a visit must be higher than the cost. The money you spend on seawalls, the money you spend on air filters should be lower than what you want to avoid, how much you want to avoid pollution. Housing price similar, right? If you choose to move from a very polluted place to a less polluted place, the housing price differential must be lower or equal to what you hate about pollution. So something along those lines. So apart from these, the other method is sometimes we call this dose response method. So a more medical term about this. So there are a lot of medical papers on pollution and health impacts. So basically looking at household mortality impacts of pollution directly. As you can see, there are all sorts of medical papers on this. So it's not just a problem well studied among economists. It's a topic well studied by people in the medical world as well. And sometimes we call that a dose response approach. it's not revealed preference. You're measuring the impacts directly, but when we're trying to convert everything into economic terms, into monetary terms, the value of statistical life is actually a revealed preference measure, right? So the direct impact on mortality is directly measured, but the conversion into money through value of statistical life is also revealed preference. So your judgment about how much death rate from 0.0003 to 0.0002 is something reviewed through how much you want to pay to avoid this risk. The pollution appears as a similar risk to you, so it increases your death rate by a particular relatively small amount, and how much you want to pay to avoid this risk. So sometimes I might ask you to compare numbers you obtain from different settings together. So if you read papers, you read hedonic pricing papers, you read defensive spending paper, you read a travel cost paper, you read kind of value of statistical life plus those response approach papers, they will come up with different numbers, but at the end of the day, you need to bring all these numbers together to see basic 10 milligram increase in PM10 concentration leads to how much the monetary loss. And if you see discrepancies in these numbers, you should be able to think about reasons that might explain this. So that's so much I can say about what you are expecting from the exam questions. We've done some questions together as practice. We can do some later. This probably not in today's class, probably later. So as I said, these are all reviewed preferences methods. They're all very good. I think in general, economists like reviewed preferences methods. Economists kind of have this belief that preference is tied. There is a tight connection between preference and action. If you can't observe preference, you should observe action. But on the other hand, another way to show preferences to people is to ask them, right? Another way to understand other people's preferences is just to ask them, right? How much are you willing to pay for something? So in general, we would prefer approach that avoid directly asking people, because obviously people might lie. So if I ask you how much you hate pollution, will you give a thoughtful answer to me, or as fast as you are thinking about the problem of purchasing a house and then compare the pollution level, or you're considering buying air filters? So will the answer you fill in a survey as thoughtful as the answer your actions of buying different things or choosing where to live, as serious as that? That's one issue. But one kind of distinctive benefit of asking of directly surveying people is that it helps us to understand the non-use value, right? So when we're talking about sources of value from environmental goods, there's three sources of value: use value, option value, and non-use value. Use value is that you're deriving benefits from these goods, from visiting, from enjoying the clean air. Option value is about the probability if this thing get destroyed, it's get destroyed semi-permanently. You might want to preserve the idea that you might visit it later and want to keep it today. So non-use value is that I will never cross paths with this particular environmental goods or sites, but I still value its existence. So think about the example about the panda. I'm putting this panda picture here for a long time. So how much are you willing to pay to save the life of these pandas? So that's a question about your preferences over pandas, right? So imagine a travel cost method. So how would you come up with people's valuation for panda using travel cost method?
You could see how much airfare people are paying to come and visit them, or how much time, duration of the flight, or duration of train journeys, driving journeys to wherever they're located, and then also like how much time they spend there, and then you would maybe work out, say, what the opportunity cost is in terms of the time that they're giving up. Start to kind of sum those together.
Yes, indeed. So there are panda sites, there are panda preservation zones, and there are people visiting the sites from all over the world. And basically you spend 3 hours queuing up and you're able to see the pandas for 5 minutes. So there must be a lot of benefits derived from this process, so you can add it together. But the thing is that there still exists a lot of people who have never been to the sites, who do not plan to visit the site, but who still want to have pandas around, right? You're happy to think about the idea that there are pandas somewhere else in the world. You might actually watch panda videos for some relaxation. I think a lot of people are doing this. You are not paying for any of these panda videos, so basically you haven't spent any money or efforts on pandas, But if I'm asking you, are you willing to donate for a panda preservation action, or want to how in general do you value the existence of panda? Probably you will say yes, you would like to pay for something if you have the chance. It's just in real life you never show any actions that review your preferences. As the area where we need something else other than review preference approach for environmental evaluation. Is that clear?
I have one question. I mean, if it's just an alternative approach, if we consider the revenue that, I mean, if we think about a panda in a specific park, or in a zoo, and we consider the revenue that comes from the fact that the panda is in the zoo compared to the scenario in which the panda is not there, can we get also an evaluation?
Yeah, that's something related to a travel cost method, right? I know zoos that will charge you extra money for access to a panda gate, basically. But that applies to people who are paying for pandas, who would like to see the pandas in reality. There are other people who enjoy the existence of panda, who enjoy the ideas that the pandas exist, but they do not plan to visit the panda sites. And either because of higher travel costs, or they just don't think it makes that much of a difference by seeing the panda in reality. They might just think that it's good enough to see them in pictures, right? And then they will feel sad if these pandas disappear for other reasons. So you can't actually observe these people's actions in real life, but they have these preferences. That's the non-use value we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about the market value.
Yeah. Yes. So it could apply to many different things. Like you never visit Yellowstone. You don't plan to visit Yellowstone pretty much in 10 years, in 20 years, whatever in your lifetime. You don't like driving there, but you think that it would be nice to have Yellowstone around, to be able to see the pictures, to just read stories about them, and knowing that they host a variety of wildlife, and knowing that they're contributing to the ecosystem. That's good enough for you. There might be people think about this. All of these concepts use value, and we believe that it's valid to consider the non-use value of particular environmental goods, and they should be part of the consideration when we're planning for things.
I agree. Thanks.
So these are also option value also applies here. Option value is not captured by actions as well, so we only observe use value through actions. So option value is something like I plan to visit the panda sites when I have free time. I don't have free time, so I might visit the panda sites in the future. It's similar to a non-use value when we come to evaluation, because that's something you're not seeing today through these people's actions. That's why we need to rely on our final evaluation approach, which is called stated preference rather than reviewed preferences. So state preference is just you ask people something rather than watch them to do something. And this specific stated preference is just asking people for their preferences. And the specific method of stated preference in evaluation is called contingent valuation. Contingent evaluation is the term we use in environmental evaluation. So the idea is to elicit people's willingness to pay in a hypothetical market, saying that I'm asking you how much you're willing to pay for the idea of preserving a site for pandas, something like that. So usually what we do with a contingent valuation study is you find some subjects, you find a group of people. It's like doing a marketing survey. It's just you're not surveying about the market goods, you're surveying about non-market goods. Imagine this scenario is about a wolf protection project. You just gather your subjects, tell them about the context of the projects, tell them that we're talking about protecting wolves. Why we are protecting wolves, looking at pictures of wolves, telling them stories about Yellowstone ecosystem, of how important are wolves in the ecosystem. All the stories describe a specific project. I think we talked about this story in the close bargaining session, right? The wolves are important in balancing the ecosystem. It avoids too many sheep who eats a lot of grass, and a lot of other animals depend on these plants. Describe a specific project. The specific project is trying to protect the wolves while being able to compensate for sheep owners, as to avoid them from excess hunting. And finally, you want to elicit people's valuation for this specific project. There are different ways by asking questions, willingness to pay. So a direct question would be, how much are you willing to pay to kind of for a project where wolves are allowed to run freely in Yellowstone. But sometimes people think that just randomly asking people how much you're willing to pay is a dumb question. It just sometimes people just don't think hard enough answering these questions. There are variation to this type of question. Would you vote for how much would you vote for surcharge of income tax of X to support a wolf program? And sometimes basically this question is asked differently to different people. So sometimes it's like, are you willing to pay for $500 so you have $500 from your income tax or a surcharge on your income tax to protect the wolves? If your answer is no, I will ask you another question: would you pay for $250 for such a project? And so basically you ask this question many times, and for each individual, or you ask a lot of individuals randomly assigning X, so you're able to trace a demand curve. If you ask the question, would you be willing to pay $500 from your tax for a wolf protection project, you get 10% of people saying yes. Then you ask again, would you pay for $100? You get 50% of people saying yes. And you can trace the demand curve using that information, which might appear to be more accurate than you just asking people directly how much you're willing to pay, right? And finally, a surveyor would be interested in collecting other information, including income, education, family status, political affiliation, so on and so forth. And a trick here is that you want to design questions to detect these protest bits, or maybe some kind of environmental family would say, I would like to pay $1 million for a wolf protection zone, or whatever, showing an attitudes. You need to make sure that when someone's saying 1 million, it's for real. It's not. You basically want to rule out the non-serious questions as much as possible. So about specific ways of doing contingent evaluation surveys, survey methods matter a lot. So if you have ever done any surveys before, you will realize that people don't like this surveys. A lot of time you're trying to approach a lot of people, they will just say no. So in-person interviews are generally the most expensive type of surveys, but they are potentially more accurate because you can observe these people's behavior. You can have more information through conversation. Mail and telephone surveys have to be short, otherwise the response rates are likely to drop dramatically. A lot of these or online surveys, you're emailing to people about these questions. You can imagine you send thousands of emails, you might get 20 responses. The response rate sometimes matters a lot here. It depends on the purpose of the question. But if you are willing to obtain a representative sample of a particular kinds of people, you don't want your response rate to drop too much, right? So imagine what kind of people tend to respond to survey questions, and think about the responding to survey questions correlated with other kind of socioeconomic characteristics of these people.
I have one question.
Sure.
About the conservative approach. Why do we have to assume them equal to 0? We should just discard them, because if too many are not responding, I mean, that could bias the average as well, I suppose.
Yes, indeed. So sometimes we call this, you're jumping a little bit. So it's about a non-response bias, right? People who are not responding tend to be different from people who respond. It could be that non-responding people are just busier. They have other better things to do. They're usually richer. Their opportunity value of time is higher. Or you can say that people who respond are people who feel strongly about this question, right? If I'm asking you a wolf protection question, you can imagine typically it would be the people who value wolves more are more likely to answer a question about valuation on the wolf protection projects. If you don't care about wolf, you may just don't answer this question. As some people are saying that we should adopt a conservative measure, saying that people who do not respond have valuation 0. But this is kind of a little bit, as Emma said, it could sometimes be too harsh about penalizing non-response. So alternatively, another method is that you collect socioeconomic characteristics of your respondents as best as possible, and you compare these groups of people to the socioeconomic characteristics like income, education, all these questions, all these features to your general population and see how much they differ. Are you just surveying a very unrepresentative sample or you're surveying a somewhat representative sample, how important are income, education, all these features affecting the responses? And obviously, all this study has to be correlational. It's hard to judge about the causal impacts or the selection on observables. We are able to see selection on observables. Higher educated people are less likely to answer these questions, or the other way around. But we won't be able to see. So if our sample suggests that having a college degree makes you 20% more likely to pay for wolf, and in your sample the share of college graduates is higher than general population, then you might adjust your number downwards, reflecting the fact that the general population might have less share of highly educated people, and in general, your finding is that higher educated people are more willing to pay for environmental protection plans. That's the basic idea of adjusting for selection on observables, but there might be selection on unobservables. Selection on unobservables corresponds to the fact that controlling for education, income, or whatever attributes you could have information on, these people's willingness to pay for wolf protection projects still affects his or her selection into filling in your surveys, which is very likely to be true, right? So for a very serious contingent valuation survey, you want to reduce the non-response bias as much as possible. Question? Good. So one idea, I have several applications for you. So after discussing the applications, there's another example. So an example I find about applying contingent valuation in Hong Kong is about this study where some community is eliciting the general public's view on an ideal harbor. I imagine that some local community is thinking about plans to renovate a particular harbor area. So there's a report on this. So if you're interested in such a study, you could just take a look. So it's a study commissioned by many different parties, and they want to know the general public's view about different ways of renovating, of developing a specific harbor area, right? You can think of these as a contingent survey, a contingent valuation, or you could say it's just looks like a market research, market study. I guess the difference is how public these areas are. Okay, so basically it consists of, as I said, usually a contingent valuation study consists of different parts. The first part, you will get some pictures, descriptions about these plans. So a specific feature of this study is that it not only want to elicit your view about specific harbor development plan, it also wants to get your preferences on which specific harbor development plan that you prefer most. Like basically, if your favorite plan is green areas, how much you're willing to pay for that. And for another group of people, your favorite plan is open area eating places, how much you're willing to pay for that. So the way that questions gets framed are pretty important. In order to understand how valuable your selection is to you, we would like to imagine how much you're willing to pay for it on a monthly basis out of your own income. So first you choose the combination of harbor development plans that attract you most, and second, out of your monthly income, how much you're willing to pay for that. So what's your view? So imagine that's the question. They're surveying general Hong Kong residents. So you could be one of them. So do you think your answer to these questions are going to be very representative of your preferences? As a researcher, that's what you're interested in, right?
I think there would naturally be some sort of skepticism in your responses. As you said, it's very important the way they frame the question. I think if you framed it in terms of maybe how much you'd be willing, or how much you wouldn't mind being taxed, that might say elicit a more realistic response versus maybe, how much you'd be willing to pay for. I mean, maybe the difference would be marginal, but I don't know, even my own reaction to those questions, I could feel it was different too. But Yeah, I don't think they'd be the most reliable information out there. I mean, at least it would give you an indicator for sure. But
yes, indeed. So one discussion about contingent valuation is you want to ask the payment method is actually a pretty sensitive issue. You want to ask your respondents in different ways to see how their answers differ. You sample you sample 3 times, and you ask different payment methods. How much are you willing to pay out of your own pocket? How much you're willing to pay out of your own income tax? How much you're willing to pay out of a public fund? Or you get 3 different answers for that, and you can imagine maybe out of a public fund, people are willing to pay for more. And also,
Honestly, there is also another issue, I believe.
Yes.
I mean, I would make a normalization of the money you are willing to pay with respect to your total income. I mean, one rich person, no problem to pay 100 HKD per month. One person that has 6,000 HKD per year per month of salary, maybe could be different.
That would strike me as a less concerning issue, because as long as your group of respondents are representative, it should be fine. Like we allowed rich people to pay for more, right? As long as that comes from their true preferences. Unless you're saying that the rich people tend to lie more about their answers.
The second thing I was thinking is how long. I mean, on monthly basis, how long? How many years? Because one thing is 1 month, 6 months, 2 years, 10 years.
Yes, that's true as well. Yeah. So that's where they could improve on their questions. So basically, your first thing is that these are in general. Does that confirm with your own ideas about an ideal harbor? So in general, people are willing to have their ideal harbor to be more natural, have more open space, green areas. A little bit facilities like parks, cultural facilities, eating places. They want least, what they want least are the roads and highways, residential complexes, which might confirm with your idea as well. So, but here's the thing about the payment willingness to pay, ways to ask willingness to pay questions. As you can see, about 25% of people say they want to pay 0 for this project. As a surveyor, what you're really interested in is this 0. Does this 0 mean that these guys just have 0 valuation, or they just don't enjoy? They have that their potential benefits derived from these areas are completely 0. But so a follow-up question is trying to ask them reasons that you choose 0 for this question, and you can see basically there are all sorts of answers that actually correspond to each of your comments. So Quentin has the idea that basically if you're paying out of tax, people are willing to speak to respond a high number, which seems to be the sentiment here, because the most cited reason for not willing to pay is that the government should take the responsibility. These people are not interpreting, to some extent, these people are not interpreting this question well, in the sense that they think that you're asking me to contribute privately to this project, but I think it's the government's job to pay for this project. But what the survey actually wants is how much you're willing to pay in general sense, no matter how the money comes from for this project. And if your valuation is high, we will use tax money, or we will partially use the tax money to cover this project. So that's an issue. And also no income or low income appears to be another main reason people are just responding 0. You want to judge how much means that these people don't just have 0 valuation for this project, or these people are just saying I'm poor enough. Are you going to tax me more even for this? People who already feel pretty unhappy about paying a lot of taxes, right? So also other question: pay tax already, no need to pay. Need to be paid by others, not myself. Like you can imagine you're probably answering this question like, I like these places. I don't think I should pay. The rich people should pay, right? So as a surveyor, you need to avoid all these questions as much as possible. I guess this second follow-up question about why don't you pay is a good revelation. That is at least a good way to help the surveyors to understand some of the 0 and try to think about what percentage of the 0s should we throw away from this answer. They're not valid 0s. Like people who said we cannot imagine the outcome might just be valid 0. All the rest you can come up with reasons that these people don't necessarily feel like these harbors means nothing for them. It's just they are not willing to pay out of their own pocket. They might have no problem about their tax money paying it, or someone else's tax money paying it. All right. So just always bear in mind what are the limitations or special considerations of the specific valuation methods. So the field to collect, I think you've contributed a lot about criticism of stated preference. Here are more basically. There's sampling bias. You want to have a sample. So suppose you want to aggregate up your survey results to the whole population, to the whole Hong Kong. Say I surveyed 300 Hong Kong residents, and there are 7 million. Shall I just aggregate up proportionally, or do I need to make a special treatment, special judgment about how representative my sample is? We can, the way to deal with sampling bias is first, you want to randomly choose the respondents. You want to reduce non-response bias as much as possible. In the event that you just have 80% of the people you surveyed not willing to answer questions, you try to survey not willing to answer questions, you need to collect a lot of personal characteristics data, ask a lot of follow-up questions. Even you can ask questions like, what makes you take this survey, to understand a little bit of the direction of biases here. Another thing is hypothetical bias. A hypothetical bias is that you don't really have to pay with the CV study, so you would just report the random number. So there are studies. The way to test the extent of hypothetical bias is to combine this with a reviewed preference study in a similar setting. For instance, there was this study where the researchers have done a CV study on the value of hunting licenses, basically asking a potential hunting lovers how much they're willing to pay for hunting licenses. And basically you say, I'm willing to pay 200 for that. Then a follow-up study would be just, I give you a hunting license with a check attached with the number you reported, and see if you're returning if you're returning the check. Like, imagine if you're serious about evaluation, you're serious about the number you report, and in the follow-up where you have to pay in real money for that, you should be able to pay you should be able to pay in real money for that. Otherwise, it's kind of revealing some kind of hypothetical bias, right? You could say that I changed my mind, but in general, if there is a big discrepancy between a stated preference approach and a reviewed preference approach on exactly the same thing, there is an issue here, right? So this hunting license is a market goods, so you can look at those, you can check these numbers. But for market goods, the Yellowstone wolves, pandas, you don't have this comparison study, so you want to improve your design to avoid hypothetical bias as much as possible. So all these methods about ways of asking for payment methods, ways to elicit payments, they're tested using a lot of these settings. Imagine you can adjust the hunting license study by randomizing on the ways you ask people about the payment methods, or describing about the contingency. So if you spend more time showing people how valuable this hunting license is, or if you spend more time just briefing them about background information, will their answers be more accurate? The third thing is about strategic bias. Strategic bias speaks to the possibility that people might lie in their answers. So the difference between hypothetical bias and strategic bias is whether or not you say something that's not basically you speak out a number that's not your real preferences, unintentionally or intentionally. If you're doing that unintentionally, just because of the fact that you can't just think, you need to think very seriously about this question, or the thinking process of asking a survey question and spending money just belong to different parts of your brain. These belongs to the hypothetical bias. On the other hand, if you lie strategically, that's a strategic bias. So what are the reasons that people might want to lie in this scenario? Put yourself in the shoes of respondents. How might you lie? What potentially could motivate you to lie to a surveyor in a survey?
I don't know. For example, if you're talking about the wolves case, you are belong to an association that protects wild species, and you want to bring people to that. So you can emphasize a bit more of the benefits, presenting better the good sides and minimizing the lower.
Yes, indeed. I guess the strategic bias as well as directional strategic bias depends a lot on the decision rule of whether or not these projects gets built, and second, how these projects is funded. Like imagine, and we're crowdfunding for a basketball field at Hong Kong UST, and the question is, and the payment method is framed in a way that we are adding up everyone's valuation. If everyone's valuation adds up to be more than the cost of building a basketball field, we will pay this using the university's money or the government's money. Would you more likely to over-report or under-report? If you're interested in playing basketball, if you have positive valuation, maybe you just over-report to make sure this project went through. It's not your own money anyway, right? On the other hand, if I'm asking the same question, saying that we are doing this crowdfunding for a basketball site, and imagine that you state your preference, like you're saying that you're willing to pay $100 for that, and we add up everyone's number, it's exactly the same as the cost, you should pay 100. Or it's something like if we add up everyone's reported sum, it's greater than the cost, then we ask you to pay proportionally. So imagine that the cost is 90% of the total added aggregate stated benefits, then ask you to pay 90% of the stated preference. Would you more likely to over-report or under-report in that scenario? Strategically. I guess it's a little bit hard to think. It all depends on what other people are thinking about this question and what your belief about other people are thinking about this question and what you believe about other people's belief or view thinking about these questions, so on and so forth. So if imagine that you think the other people are reporting truthfully, and you are sure that there are enough basketball lovers on campus that their aggregate reported number is going to be higher than the cost, then you will report 0, right? You will say, no matter how much I speak up, the project is going to get funded anyway. And if I speak out a positive number, I'm going to pay a positive number. If I'm saying 0, other people are going to pay for that. But if this fault applies to everyone, then a project that could be funded might end up not getting funded. So you need to think about that prosperity, prospect as well. You need to think about what's the probability that other people are thinking the same way as I did. So it's a pretty complicated strategic thinking, assuming that people don't have a full understanding of what other people are thinking about. You could get all sorts of responses. You could get some people over-reporting and some people under-reporting. So that's basically what we say about strategic bias. So you intentionally over-report or under-report. You know your own preferences, but you don't want to share this with the surveyors. I think we can have a 8 minutes break at the moment. Let's come back in 8:05. Okay, let's come back. So we talked about different sort of biases. Another one is the information bias. That is, people are the answer that you elicited from a contingent valuation study could respond pretty sensitively to the availability of information, the amount of information, what types of information you give to people. Like if you're telling people about the importance of wolves in the ecosystem, it would improve their willingness to pay justifiably. So the lesson to learn in designing a contingent valuation study is that you should cover as much information that you think is important as possible in an objective way. Another bias is what we call a scope bias. If you would pay $20 to save 1 lake, would you pay 20,000 to save 1,000 lakes? Or if you are willing to pay, if the question is about saving 1 panda, can these numbers add up to all the panda population? How would you just frame the question? So if you're asking people how much you're willing to pay to save 1 panda, I guess in general, my sense is that you won't be able to aggregate it up. Like basically, the total amount you're willing to pay, these people are willing to pay to save 1,000 panda, do not necessarily to be 1,000 times of the money they're willing to pay to save 1 panda. So instead of asking this more hypothetical 1 panda question, the best way is to ask them about specific projects, kind of more realistic projects, panda protection plan, same things along those lines. The takeaway is that if you want a contingent study on the valuation of 1 panda, it tends to be very inaccurate because these numbers just can't add up. So a lot of times people are, some researchers are, in my opinion, are overly ambitious. They want to decompose different attributes of a specific site. Something like if I'm asking you a survey about protecting wolves or protecting a beach, and there are different attributes of the beach, like the sand, the weather, the mountains nearby, clean air. There are different aspects, and sometimes if you elicit people's valuation over these different aspects, but separately, you might not be able to add it up. So a lot of times people are interested in say how much I'm going to, how important is the sand quality of this beach. Like imagine when we're doing the travel cost method, a drawback is that you can't decompose the attributes because we only observe one visit. Some people might say that we could try to decompose these things using contingent valuation, which is ask people about their valuation for sand, for air, for different parts of the beach. The thing is, will these things add up? Sometimes the answer is no, but I guess it depends a lot on the